What if the worst day of your life, the day your best friend stole your fiancé, the day you pulled off your engagement ring in complete silence, the day you sat alone in your car at midnight outside the apartment where your entire future had been quietly replaced? What if that day was not the end of your love story, but the very first sentence of the real one? What if every tear you cried in grocery stores, every night you rebuilt yourself from nothing, every morning you chose to survive instead of surrender? What if all of it was simply the universe preparing you for the man who would walk into a room 7 minutes late and look at you like you were the only thing in it worth paying attention to? What if your greatest betrayal was actually your greatest redirection? Stay with me, because this story is about a woman who lost everything she thought she needed and found everything she actually deserved. And by the time it ends, you will never look at your pain the same way again. The dress was hanging on my bedroom door like a white ghost the morning I found out. I remember standing in front of my mirror, still in my silk robe, coffee going cold on the nightstand, phone buzzing against the wood. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost continued being the woman who had no idea her entire life was a beautifully decorated lie. I answered. It was Priya's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Sharma, who had my number from the time we'd organized Priya's surprise birthday last spring. Her voice was careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that people use when they're delivering something that will shatter you completely, and they know it, but they've decided you deserve the truth more than you deserve comfortable ignorance. I thought you should know, she said. I've seen him here, many times, for many months. Him, Rohan. My Rohan. My fiancé of 8 months, my boyfriend of 4 years. The man whose mother had already selected the wedding caterers. The man whose name I had quietly tried beside my own in cursive in the margins of my notebooks like a teenager. That him. At Priya's apartment. Priya, who had held my hand through every fight Rohan and I ever had. Priya, who had cried with me at the engagement party, told me I deserved every happiness, fixed my hair and said, "You look perfect," and meant it so convincingly that I'd hugged her and thought, God, I am so lucky to have her. Priya, who had my passwords, my secrets, the name of my therapist, the story of my first heartbreak, the list of every insecurity I'd whispered to her in the dark over wine and late nights. Priya, who had been sleeping with my fiancé for 6 months. I didn't cry immediately. That surprised me. I thought I would collapse. I had always imagined that if something this catastrophic ever happened, I would simply dissolve into the floor. Instead, I sat very still on the edge of my bed, and I looked at my engagement ring, and I felt something terrifyingly quiet move through me. Like the seconds before a storm when even the birds go silent. I called Rohan. He answered on the second ring, and in the half-breath before he spoke, I heard her voice in the background, soft, laughing, domestically comfortable in a way that told me this was not sneaking around anymore. This was a life already in progress, a life built inside the hollow space of mine. Zara, he said, just my name, nothing else. Because there was nothing else to say, and he knew it, and I knew it. And the silence between us was the loudest confession I'd ever heard. I removed the ring while he was still on the line. I placed it on the nightstand next to my cold coffee. I said, very quietly, "Don't come for your things when I'm home." And I ended the call. The months that followed were not the poetic kind of grief that movies promise you. They were ugly and physical and humiliating. I stopped eating properly and then ate too much. I cried in grocery stores standing in front of cereal boxes. I deleted and re-downloaded dating apps 17 times without ever actually talking to anyone. I drove past Priya's building twice at midnight, not to do anything, just to sit in my car outside and feel the full weight of what had happened inside those walls. I called Priya once. Just once. She answered with that same careful voice Mrs. Sharma had used, the voice of someone who has prepared their apology the way an actor prepares a monologue. "Zara, I never meant for..." "Did you?" I asked. "Did you ever, even once, think about what this would do to me?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said, and I hung up. I didn't contact either of them again. Not because I was strong, because I was so furiously, bone-deep devastated that the only thing keeping me dignified was the decision to simply disappear from their story entirely. Let them have it. Let them build their happiness on the wreckage of my trust. I refused to be the dramatic ex-fiancé haunting the edges of their new life. I had too much pride for that and too little energy for anything else. What I did instead was go back to work. I was an architect, interior spaces, residential mostly, occasionally commercial. I buried myself in blueprints and client meetings and the particular meditative satisfaction of transforming empty rooms into places where people would eventually live their real lives. There was something deeply therapeutic about it that I hadn't noticed before. Creating beauty in spaces, deciding what belongs where, what should stay, what should be removed, what serves the room and what only takes up space unnecessarily. I was redesigning myself the same way, quietly, room by room. 3 months after the ring came off, my firm was hired for a major project, a high-end restaurant space in the city center. New ownership, full redesign, significant budget, ambitious vision. I was assigned as lead designer, and I threw myself into it completely, grateful for something demanding enough to occupy every corner of my mind. The first meeting with the client was on a Tuesday morning in November. I was early, which I always am. I set up my presentation materials, arranged my fabric swatches and color samples on the conference table, poured myself water from the carafe, and sat waiting with the particular professional composure I had spent months reconstructing after spending too many mornings crying on my bathroom floor. He walked in 7 minutes late. And I want to be precise about what happened in that moment, because it wasn't what romance novels describe. It wasn't thunderclaps or slow motion or the room going blurry. It was something much more subtle and much more dangerous than that. It was the feeling of recognition, like looking up and seeing someone you somehow already know, except you have never met them. Except your body responds as if you have been waiting specifically for this particular person to enter this particular room, and you had no idea you were waiting until the moment it happened. He was tall, dark jacket, no tie, the kind of effortless presentation that suggests someone completely comfortable in their own skin. He had the sort of face that takes a moment to fully process, not immediately striking, but deeply interesting, the kind that improves with every additional second you spend looking at it. He saw my arranged samples on the table, and his eyes moved across them with genuine curiosity before they moved to me. "You're early," he said, not as an accusation, almost as admiration. "You're late," I said. He smiled. It rearranged something in my chest that I had thought was permanently rearranged in the wrong direction. "Arjun," he said, extending his hand. "Zara," I said, taking it. His handshake was firm, but not performatively so. He held it 1 second longer than business requires, and released it without making anything of that extra second, which somehow made me more aware of it than if he had made something of it entirely. We sat across from each other, and I began my presentation, and he listened the way that very few people actually listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, not formulating responses while I was still talking, but actually, genuinely present in the conversation. His eyes didn't wander. His questions were specific and intelligent, and occasionally caught me off guard with their depth. "When you design a space," he said at one point, leaning forward slightly, "what's the first thing you try to understand?" "What the room wants to feel like," I said. "Not look like, feel like." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's exactly the right answer." Something about the way he said it, not patronizing, not flirtatious, simply honest, made my professional composure do something it had not done in months. It softened, just slightly, just enough that I noticed and hoped he didn't. The project required weekly meetings, then twice-weekly site visits, then the kind of extended working sessions that eat into evenings without anyone deciding that's what's happening. It simply becomes natural. the work expanding into time that neither of you is protecting anymore, because you've both quietly stopped wanting to be anywhere else. He brought coffee to the third site visit, my order, which he had apparently memorized from watching me order it once without my knowing he'd been paying attention. He handed it to me without ceremony and turned to look at the half-demolished east wall we'd been debating, as if he hadn't just done something that sent a warm, quiet charge through every inch of my body. I stood beside him, looking at the wall, and said, "How did you know my order?" "I pay attention," he said simply, still looking at the wall. "To what?" I asked. He turned and looked at me directly then. "To things that are worth paying attention to." I looked back at the wall. I took a long, careful sip of my coffee. My heart was doing something wildly irresponsible. He asked me to dinner on a Thursday evening in December, 6 weeks into the project. We were standing in the almost finished bar area, and the light was doing something golden through the new windows, and he looked at me with that same direct, patient attention that I had been slowly, helplessly surrendering to for weeks. "Dinner," he said. "Not a meeting, not about the project, just dinner." "Why?" I asked, not because I didn't understand, because I wanted to hear what he would say. "Because I think about you between the meetings," he said, "and I'd like to stop pretending that's purely professional." My stomach dropped in the most exquisitely terrifying way. "I should tell you something," I said. "I came out of something very bad not long ago. Someone I trusted completely. 2 people I trusted completely. I stopped, took a breath. "I'm not the same woman I was a year ago. I'm not sure if that's better or worse yet." He was quiet, not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. "What were you like a year ago?" he asked. "Trusting," I said. "Naive about people, certain about the future." "And now?" I considered it honestly. More careful, more real, less willing to perform happiness I don't feel. He nodded slowly. Then, "That sounds like someone worth knowing better. Not despite that, because of it." I went to dinner with him. What happened between us over the following weeks was not the frantic, desperate kind of falling that I had confused for passion in my relationship with Rohan. This was different in every way that mattered. It was slow, and it was deliberate, and it was intensely, electrically conscious. Every conversation felt like going deeper into a place I hadn't known existed inside myself. He asked questions nobody had ever thought to ask me. He listened to the answers with the kind of focus that makes you feel, for the first time in perhaps your entire life, genuinely seen, not the curated version of yourself you present, but the actual, complicated, occasionally messy, stubbornly surviving real version. He cooked for me on our 5th date, his apartment, deliberately casual, deliberately intimate. I sat on his kitchen counter while he moved around the stove, and we talked about things that had nothing and everything to do with what was quietly building between us. At some point, the conversation stopped, and the silence was not empty. It was full, charged, the kind of silence that has a texture and a temperature. He crossed the kitchen toward me slowly. He stopped close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him before he even touched me. His hands came up to either side of my face, not grabbing, not rushing, just holding, gently, the way someone holds something they are terrified to damage. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I don't," I said, barely above a whisper. When he kissed me, it was the kind of kiss that doesn't just involve lips. It involved every bruised and healing part of me. It was careful and deep and unhurried, and I felt something unknot in my chest that had been pulled tight for so long I had stopped noticing the ache. My hands found the fabric of his shirt and held on, not desperately, but with the specific certainty of someone who has finally found the solid ground they forgot they were looking for. He pulled back just far enough to look at me. His thumbs moved gently along my jaw. "I've been wanting to do that since the first meeting," he said. You were late to the first meeting, I reminded him. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reaches the eyes, and kissed me again. And this time neither of us pulled back for a very long time. What grew between us in the months following was the kind of love that doesn't require performance. He never needed me to be more healed than I was. On the nights when the betrayal still surfaced, and it did sometimes, in the middle of perfectly good evenings, he didn't flinch from it or try to fix it with words. He simply stayed present. He held space the way my best work holds space, intentionally, thoughtfully, with full understanding that some rooms take time to feel like home. He told me once, lying in the dark, that he had been drawn to me initially because of the way I moved through a space, with complete purpose, but without aggression. You know exactly where you're going, he said, but you're not trying to prove it to anyone. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the woman who had sat on the edge of her bed, removing her engagement ring. I thought about the grocery store crying, and the midnight drives, and the 17 dating app downloads. I thought about the months of rebuilding myself room by room, quietly, without applause. I thought about Priya, and I realized, with the particular complex grace of someone who has survived something devastating, that I didn't hate her anymore. Not because what she did was forgivable, but because the consequence of her cruelty was this man, this feeling, this life. She had, in her own calculating and selfish way, removed the wrong story so the right one could finally be written. She had stolen the man I thought I needed, and in doing so, she had sent me directly to the man I actually deserved. This story is not simply about betrayal. It is about the savage, transformative power of surviving it. The real message living beneath every line of this narrative is that the worst things done to us by the people we love most are sometimes, in retrospect, the most precise redirections our life could have received. Pain is not the punishment. Pain is the process. The friend who smiled while she dismantled your world, the fiancé who chose convenience over commitment, the ring that came off silently on a November morning, none of these were endings. They were the universe's most brutal and most loving editing process, removing every element that was never truly yours to keep. The man who finds you after the storm doesn't find a broken woman. He finds a woman who survived breaking and rebuilt herself into something far more real, far more magnetic, and far more ready for the love she actually deserved all along. Every scar you carry is not evidence of your damage. It is evidence of your endurance. And endurance, in the right person's eyes, is the most breathtaking thing in the world.